Okay, good morning. So we are doing today Samach Aleph Amud Aleph, but in order to get there, we first have to finish off on Samach Amud Beis, and we are at the widest lines, about 3 or 4 lines down by the two dots. So the Gemara says, Chayev Adam. Right, we're up to over here where I think it says, yeah, Chayev Adam Levarech. Right, so if you remember the Mishnah. Go back to the Mishnah on the Dalet for a second. The Mishnah told us that two things. One, it had told us that Mavarch ala ra me'ein ala teva, ala teva me'ein ala ra. You make a bracha on the bad, something similar to the good, and vice versa. And then it said Chayav on Mavarch ala ra kishem shemavarch ala teva. Person has to make a bracha on bad as one makes one on good. Shneimar v'afta Hashem lekechem v'chol vav v'chol nafshcha. B'chol vavcha shnei tzerecha b'yetzer b'yetzer b'chol nafshcha afilu nezelas nafshcha b'chol meidecha b'chol meinecha. So these were the various things of the connections between having to make a bracha on good things that happen to a person or bad things that happen to a person. All right. So now we're about to do that. They're back on Samach on base. Chayav on levarch. Says the Gemara, "My chayav levarch ala rosh shem shemevarch ala tov." What does that mean when we say in the Mishnah that a person has to make a bracha on bad in the same way that he makes it on good? What do we mean by that? If you're going to say that in the same way a person when something has good, something happened to them, that they make a bracha about teva meitiv. So when something bad happens to them, they should also make a teva meitiv. But we learned Abasuris teves, Aimer teva meitiv, Abasuris rois, Amar baruch dayna emes. But we know that the Mishnah is telling us that you don't make a teva meitiv when something bad happens. You make a baruch dayna emes. So what do you mean when you say Shem Shem Baruch Ala Teva Kach and Baruch Ala Ra? Not the same thing. So Amarav Alei Nitzurcha. Rav agrees. That is to say, you are not required to make the same bracha on bad that is on good. However, what do we mean when we say Kishem Shem Baruch Ala Teva? Right? That the Chayav on Baruch Ala Ra Kishem Shem Baruch Ala Teva. What do we mean? That means El Kublinu B'Simcha. That is your attitude when you're making the bracha. Look at the Lashon Rambam there as well. When a person has something bad happen to them, they make a different bracha, baruch dayna emes. They have to take it in a sense with the same equanimity, with the same spirit, as though they are getting a good tidings, as though they're getting a good news. Amar Ba'acham Shem Rav Levi, Ma'ikra. What does it mean in pasuk? Chesed u'mishpat ashira lach Hashem azamra. Right? What does it mean in pasuk? And the pasuk says that you're going to praise Hashem. Ashira lach Hashem azamra. I'm going to be singing and praising Hashem. But the opening of the words are chesed u'mishpat. So the Gemara darshans, im chesed ashira, ve'mishpat ashira. Whether or not I'm getting what I perceive as chesed, then I'm happy to sing and dance and praise Hashem. But ve'mishpat, if I'm getting things that are not so good, nevertheless I still am saying shira and praising Hashem. A different source of Shmuel Nachmani Amar. Right, so normally we have Rabbi Shmuel Achman and Rabbi Yonason. So this is another example. This is the second time I think in Brachos that we're having an example of Shmuel Achman without Rabbi Yonason. So he says, Amar Hacha, what's his source? B'Hashem Mahal Davar, B'Elikim Mahal Davar. So we know, right, that there's a difference between Yud Kei Vav Kei and Elikim is what? One is the midah of Rachmanis and one is the midah of Din. So the explanation being B'Hashem Mahal Davar Zumi Teva. So when we say Hashem, so then it's Midah Teva. So I praise Hashem. I say Hallel. And when it's Belikim, when it's Mishpat, I still say Shira. I still praise Hashem. Another source. Every time Hashem Ekra. Right. I lift up the cup of salvations and I call out to Hashem. And when something terrible happens to me, I still call out to Hashem. So either way, right? When I have a case of shuais, I'm calling out to Hashem, and when things are wonderful, salvation, Shem Hashem Ekra, And nevertheless, also when Sarvi Yoganem, if I'm finding terrible things, Hashem Hashem Ekra, I'm still calling out to Hashem. So all these are basic sources for the same point. And now we have one more, Rabbanan Amri Me'acha, a different source, a famous line from Eiv, after he lost his children and his fortune and the mamish everything. What does he say? Hashem nasan v'Hashem lakach, Yehi Shem Hashem mevarach. Hashem, sometimes he gives, sometimes he takes away, but the name of Hashem should be blessed. Fine. So now we have proven the point that Shem Shemavarach and that Chayav Levarach Alarok Shem Shemavarach Alateva means not that you're required to make the same bracha. You make a different bracha. You make a bracha of Diana Emes and something bad happens, but you say it with the feelings, with the slavas, with the gefilt, as you would if you had something good happen to you, because you know that ultimately, as we will see, it is all for the good. And now we get to a very famous story. Says the Gemara as follows: Amar Rabun Amar Rav Mishum Rabbi Meir v'chein Tana Mishmei Rabbi Kiva. Again, Meir was a student for Rabbi Kiva, so it makes sense that this goes back to Rabbi Kiva. La'olam Yehei Adam Ragil Loimer Kol Da'avid Rachmana Latav Avid. Whatever the Rebbeinu Shalom does is for the best. Where did Rabbi Kiva learn this from? Who's Rabbi Kiva's Rabbi? No, everybody remember, we had a Gemara. What was the Gemara? It's not mentioned many times in Shas. Nachum Ish Gamzu. We haven't I mentioned him in Brachos. And the way to remember it is he comes up in Tainus on Chav Aleph and in Brachos on Chav Beis. So if you look in the Gemara back here on Chav Beis, the Gemara told us, you remember there's a whole story about Balkari, the whole story about Balkari. So the Gemara says that that you don't have to go to the mikvah, right? The whole tefillah Ezra that was required, you have to go to the mikvah for to carry. So they taught that you don't have to do it. It's simply take a shower. Balkari shnasan al tisha kabin mayim is Torah is enough. Nacham ish gamzu lachashal Rabbi Akiva. Rabbi Akiva lachashal Banazai Yosef v'shanal Tamid v'shuk. The more they discusses why they whispered it for the good, for whatever the reasons were. But who taught who? Nachum ish gamzu taught it to Rabbi Akiva. It was his Rebbe. And what does the Gemara say in Tainus on Chaf Aleph? A very famous story about Nachum ish gamzu that he says Gamzu l'tayv. Others say the Aruch I think says that he comes from a place called Gamzu or something like that. Fine. But certainly that loses some of the oomph when you teach it to the kids, right? Gamzu l'tayva. Right? What's the difference between Gamzu l'tayva and called the Avid Rachman l'tav Avid? I'm not sure that there's a fundamental difference. Maybe one is in other words, right? The lesson that Hillel taught, right? Ma d'sanur l'chaver l'tav, right? Whatever you don't like, you shouldn't do to your friend, is different than sort of their golden rule. Right, there, Rabbi Kiva says, "Is different." Right, you can see a lot of differences between the positive way of versus the negative way of saying of saying That's a very one thing in the negative, one thing in the positive. Here, they're each saying the same thing. One saying, Gamzu l'tova. This will also be for the best. And called David Rachmana l'tavavin. Whatever God does will be for the best. Everything is what God does, so it'll all be for the best. I only see the difference between Aramaic and Hebrew. Fine. So what is the story here about Akiva? Says and so then it comes out that what Rav Huna is saying is that Chayv Adam Levarach Alarok Shem Levarach Alateva means that even the bad things that happen to us are Gamzul Teva, are Command of Rahman Latav, that there is inherent good in it, even if it doesn't feel very good in the moment. Says the Gemara. So what's the story of Rabbi Kiva? Because Rabbi Kiva was on the road, Matali Masa. He came to a place, Boyush Paisa. So he wants a place to stay. He wants to take a room in an inn. Lo Yavile. They said no to him. Goodbye. So Amar called Rahman Latav. He said, whatever Hashem does, it's for the good, it's for the best. So what did he do? He went to go sleep in the field outside. And he had with him chicken, donkey, and a candle. Maybe that's why they didn't give him a room, because they said we don't take animals. I'm not sure, but I say as a joke. Okay, but whatever it was, he's in the field, and he would go to sleep. Also, Zika, a big wind came along. Kavi l'shraga blows out the candle. Also shunra, right? V'achol l'gadya. No, that's not this. So also shunra, what happens? But we had that also in Brachot. Remember, we had shunra versus shinra, right? So we had that also recently. So also shunra achol tarnegayla. The shunra came along and ate up the chicken, and what happened? So now what does he have left? Just the donkey. Also arya achol chamra. And then a lion came along and ate the donkey. By the way, while there aren't lions in Israel today, they are native to Eretz Yisrael, and there were lions. That's how David. You see lions throughout Tanakh. Yeah. Okay. So we have now a situation where Kiva is lying in the field. He hasn't got his candle to see anything. He hasn't got his chicken. He hasn't got his donkey. Now he's truly alone. Amar called over Rachmana L'Tav. Right. So everything Hashem does is for the best. Called over Rachmana L'Tav. Belelia Asa Gaisa, that night, the army came. So some sort of a regiment, a brigade. So Shavilam, some Bilal Asa Gaisa Shavilam Asa, they came and they put the town into captivity. Amaluhu Lav Amri Luchu Kol Ma Sha'isa HaKadosh Baruch Hu. As we turn the page now to Samach Aleph and Aleph, Hakol Tov. Whatever Hashem does for the best. So this is mamish. It turns out in the moment it looked like things were darkest. Right when it looked like things were going terrible, was actually a big saving for him. But that is, in effect, how one has to see every tragedy. That is essentially an opportunity for something new in life to be able to get to the next level. Each tragedy, each pitfall, each challenge, each hill that one has to cross is essentially another opportunity. Yeah. Okay, so now we already quoted Rav Huna, so now we're going to quote something else. So Amar Rav Huna Marav, Mishum Rabbi Meir, La'olam yu devar shel adam mu'aten l'fnei HaKadosh Baruch Hu. A person should keep his mouth shut, meaning it follows nicely. We just said, Kol da'av Rachman l'tavav, don't open your mouth, because you don't know how things will turn out. But the context here could be related to that, or it could just be another mem from Rav Huna. Either way, what we're saying here from Rav Huna, saying the name of Rav Meir, is that a person shouldn't speak, connected to Rebbeinu Shalom, he should keep his mouth shut. Why? The pasuk tells him, "Kehelas, right? Don't run your mouth off. Don't make yourself crazy to be talking negative about the Rebbeinu Shalom. God's in heaven, you're on earth. Therefore, your word should be small. In other words, when you are in a situation, right? And your mom is cucking and you're furious, it's very, very hard to see the wider picture. You take a few steps out of the situation, right? You go up a few stories high and you can see how the things evolve and what's going on. You see a bigger picture. Obviously, this is allegorical in the sense that what we mean to say here is not to talk about the literal aspects of where Hashem was. Remember, we had the Gemara before, actually, right? Abai and Rav is saying, "Where is Hashem?" Right, pointing. So what we're attempting to say is that the Rebbeinu Shalom has the full picture. Right? We talked about it recently in terms of the mashal about. Oh, we didn't talk about it. I talked on Shabbos day that the only way to be able to. I heard this from my Hasidic cousin. The research I had done was the most I ever found was I think it was Y.Y. Jacobson used this instead. It was from the Grub, but he doesn't give where the Grub is at. So I don't know if it's the Grub who says it, but right that when we say on Tisha B'av, say also in Yom Kippur, talk about the Sarige Malchus. So we say in that piyut that when it came time to kill these Sarige Malchus, so the angels rebelled against Rebbeinu Shalom, and they said the Torah is clear, like this is not. The Hashem responds to them and says, "Enough. Another word out of you, I'm going to return the world to mine. I'm going to destroy the world." So why is that the threat? I'm going to turn the world back to zero. So this marshal was given as follows: that was once a king who ordered a very fancy cloth, like brocade gold threads from like Paris, and there was a tailor, a Jewish tailor, who was like the best tailor in the city and for miles around. They had him make himself the most fancy, not the emperor without clothes, it's the emperor with the clothes. So he makes him a fancy, fancy thing. And the emperor's walking around in it, the pirates, and everybody's like, wow, this is the most gorgeous thing. How did you have such a beautiful? Wow. And of course, there's one guy who says, Your Excellency, the tailor is a Jew. Yeah. Says, how do you know he didn't steal some of this very fancy cloth for himself? So the emperor's like, you're right. Brings in the tailor, says, give me the rest of the cloth. So there isn't any rest. He says, prove it. How do I prove a negative? I put everything into the suit. I don't have anything left. He says, well, you're going to go to jail. He says, fine, I'll prove it. He says, bring me the fancy clothing. And he starts to untie it, unstitch it, and rip it up. And he says, what are you doing? He says, you want me to prove it? In order to show you that there's not one that piece that was wasted, I have to open it up and show you. I have to take the whole thing apart. That's what it means. HaKadosh Baruch was telling the Malachei Asharis that you can't, within your human mind, within the world, within your physical material selves, ever understand the full picture. You want me to show you the full picture? I'm going to have to go back to my separation. I'm going to have to go back to Teva Vayel. I'll have to go back to the beginning. I'll show you how everything connects and how all the story works out. So over here as well, in a sense, Shlomo Melech is warning people, don't run your mouth so much. You don't know the full story. You're here on earth. You're not in heaven. You don't have a wide picture. You have a very, very narrow lens. All you see is what's in front of you. It's like the dog, right? When you hit the dog, what does the dog do? He's like going after the stick. Go after the hand, not the stick. Yeah. All right, continue to the Gemara. The Darsh of Nachum Baruch Chizda, Ma'ida Siva Yitza Hashem Elokim Es Adam. What does it mean in Pasuk and Bereshis that Hashem created man? So the Pasuk says with the Vayitza with two yuds. So what is that? What is that need for two yuds? So it says the Gemara. Vayitza Hashem Elokim Es Adam Shnei Yudin. Shnei Yitzarim Bar HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Echad Yetzer Tov, Echad Yetzer Ra. HaKadosh Baruch Hu created a person with two Yetzers. One is the Yetzer Tov, one is the Yetzer Ra. And that's what it means. Vayitzer with two yuds, with two Yetzers. Vayitzer Yetzer, so two Yetzers. Maskevor of Nachman Yitzchak Elamayata Behemot like Siv Vayitzer. By Behemot it doesn't say Vayitzer. What do you mean by Behemot doesn't say Vayitzer? Behemot has the Yetzer. Says the Gemara. The Gemara continues that Elamayata Behemot like Siv Vayitzer. By Behemot doesn't say Vayitzer. Less like Yitzra. You think Behemot doesn't have a Yetzer? So we see that animals they hurt, they bite, they kick. What do you mean? Animals have yitzers. I did give a class on this. I don't know 7, 8 years ago. This idea that, and it goes all the way to the Middle Ages, where they would adjudicate animals. Like we have an halacha that if an animal kills, an animal can get killed. The animal is used for nefarious purposes, not this week's parsha, next week's parsha. It gets killed. What aspect of this is an animal to be blamed? In other words, are you just killing the animal because the animal is dangerous, or are you just killing the animal because there's some blame that the animal deserves to be punished? So there's the Ramban, not in this week's parsha, but in next week's parsha. You look at the Ramban in next week's parsha. The Ramban says that a nefesh of a behem is a real nefesh. That's why he has hanas that he goes after, and that's why he runs away from danger. So there's a certain das for an animal. So the Gemara is saying you can't say vayiter v'shnei yitzarim is a reference to Yetzer Tov and Yetzer Ra, because by an animal it doesn't say vayiter with two yuds, and an animal for sure has a Yetzer Hara also, because it also is nasty sometimes. That's essentially what the Gemara is saying over here. Now, clearly, whatever an animal has is not on the level of a human being, right? We once spoke about this, right? That you want to see the difference between an animal and human being. The most sophisticated animal, right? You put a mirror in front of him, he goes crazy. Google it, you'll see the experiments of animals with mirrors in the forest. You'll see animals come to the mirror and they go crazy, barking. Where's the they're looking, they're panting, puffing and puffing, looking. Where's the buddy animal? They can't find it. Now they want to make arguments to scientists with dolphins. No, and this I'm not an expert enough to know, but a 2-year-old already looks in a mirror and sees its reflection. So no matter whatever yetzer an animal has, whatever nefesh it has, nefesh Bahamas, and whatever you want to say, it ultimately doesn't get to like a 2-year-old, a 3-year-old. At some point, even a small child has a more sophisticated understanding of what the self means. So one more thing on this point. There's an animalistic aspect about this that is very true, that humans don't live on. According to Ramban, there was a level between Vayipach Ba'av and Nishmas Chaim, as part of the Yitzer Hashem Elokim et Adam, Vayipach Ba'av and Nishmas Chaim. That is to say, there were stages. There was a stage where humans lived, not getting into this in terms of the evolution and the world, and I'm not into any of this right now. Just a simple understanding, says the Ramban, there's a level of human, and those versed in various Hasidic denominations, Torah, various different kinds of souls. And so the Ramban points out, it's Pashup Shan Chumash. Vayitzer Hashem Elokim et Adam, Vayipach Ba'av Nishmas Chaim. Before the Nishmas Chaim, it was a human. There was a human being, but it didn't have that extra chelik of neshama. It didn't have that highest level of soul, and so essentially it was very animalistic. But there is something here that you see throughout the progression of creation, and you can see it in every kid as the kid grows up. That what we call the kid's innocence is essentially they are Teichei Kabare in the fullest. Teichei Kabare in the fullest means there's no difference. They're 100% all there. The reason we get embarrassed of standing not dressed is because we're seeing ourselves not dressed. But if you're fully inside yourself and there's no aspect of you that exists outside of yourself, so you're like in the mirror case, you don't see yourself outside of you. So then obviously there's somebody else there because you cannot perceive anything that's outside of yourself. And every kid, every adult has to go through this transformation in life where you end up becoming to a place that's outside of yourself. It's a much more sophisticated understanding, but it's also chock full of untruth. But it's chock full of sheker. That's fundamentally what a kid has and what an animal has is that it's 100% truthful. It's not sophisticated. It's truly emes la'amitai in a very low sense. There still may be two yetzes, but it's 100% being lived. A kid, a very small one, can cry and scream and yell and be happy to the fullest. To the fullest. Okay, continues the Gemara. So the Gemara says it can't be that Vayitzer means Shnei Yitzarim because an animal, it also says Vayitzer and doesn't have two Yuds, and an animal also has two Yitzarim. So what does the Gemara say it has to be instead? El Shimon Pazi, Damer Shimon Pazi. What does it mean the two Yuds? Oili mi Yitzri, the Oili mi Yitzri, right? Nabach to me from Rebbeinu Shalom, as Rashi says. Oili mi Yitzri, Nabach to me, im Elech Acha Yitzri. Like, woe unto me from God if I go after my Yitzer. And Oili mi Yitzri, and if I don't go after my Yetzer, if I go after God, I'm terrified of my Yetzer. I'm again a Birhum. It's going to give me tons of Herurim. The more in Yumalam Ches tells us Herure Avera, our Kashan Me Avera. Right? So either way, what's it called? I'm damned if I do, I'm damned if I don't. Either way, it's a catch-22, I'm going to be stuck. So another approach to what it means to two Yudzi now, because do Partsuf and Bar Gadosh Baruch Hu B'Adam Rishon. Hashem created two faces with regards to man. Hashem created the front and the back by a human being. What does this mean? This is a very, very, very long conversation, very deep one. But according to the idea of Du Partsufin, Hashem creates Adam as being both male and female. It then explains and gives rise to a very unbelievable understanding. I'll give you a glimpse of it just for a second. And this is nothing to do with Pshat here in the Gemara, just, our minute of Kabbalah for the day. So if you look at the creation of the sun and the moon as parallel to the creation of the man, you'll see something very fascinating. The Chazal tells the Gemara in Chulin Samach tells us that what? The initial sun and moon were what? the same. But the moon said to the Ben Shalom, Yefsha, that could be two things that I'm shtam for Keser Echem. Hashem said, okay, like make yourself small. He said, I just did an honest and true thing. Why do I have to make myself small for that? And Hashem says, don't worry about it. I'll give you some stars. It's not enough. The moon's not consoled, and Hashem promises this and this, the whole thing. But what is we davening for every time we're saying now it's Rosh Chodesh? What are we going to say in a couple of days? We're going to say Kiddush Levana. What are we saying Kiddush Levana? Hey, what? The Ar Levana should be like what? The Ar Cham Kar Shivas Meiberish should be like the back. Hashem should be the mal, the pagam, the miyut that is in the moon. That's done for every Rosh Chodesh. That means to say there was a stage where the moon was equal with the sun. There's a stage of diminishment, and there's a stage of rehabilitation where it comes back together. Look at the creation of Adam and Chava. If Adam and Chava were created the same, created together, do partsufim, meaning the front was either Adam or Eve, or the back was either Adam or Eve, whichever. And then there's a separation between Adam and Eve. That separation ends up with the woman being diminished. How is the woman diminished? What does the pasuk tell us? The pasuk says, "Elisha Amar, What's the last words? Vehu Yimshal Bach." And then you go to Yirmiyah Parak Lamed Aleph. There in Yirmiyah Parak Lamed Aleph, it says Hashem is going to be Bera, a Bria Chadasha, a new creation of the world, and the Keva to save your Gever. Go look at all the Mefarshim over there, and you'll understand the connection between the woman and the moon, and of course the woman and the moon, each having the sort of similar cycles, etc. As Lam would say, we can't. Moving on, says the Gemara. Even Hashem built out the tzela. What is the tzela? If you look in your King James edition of the Bible, it probably says something about a rib, right? But for our purposes now, we don't know what a tzela means. So, says the more Rav Shmuel. We have a machlokes in Rav and Shmuel. Chad Amar Parsuf, Chad Amar Zonav. One says the tzela means the parsuf. In other words, what we just said, that there was a sort of, I'm not saying hermaphrodite type being, but a type of being, right? The Leonardo da Vinci picture, like the man and the woman together, the androgynous person. So this was, in the eyes of Chazal, a sort of a being that contained both male and female on different sides. How they moved around, I have no idea, like a Siamese twin out of one body. Says the Gemara. So, according to whoever Rav or Shmuel, but even Asatzela would be the parts of. In other words, Hashem separated out the beings into two beings. The Chad Amar Zonav, one says there was a tail, meaning that what does it mean by Hashem Asatzela? Hashem took this tail that Adam had, and from that he fashioned a woman. Right? The tail could be the rib, it could be a literal tail. I'm not getting into the scientific thing about we all have tails. Like this is a whole different topic. So that's the Gemara. Parts of course, Madam who says that it was an actual figure of a male and a female. So Hainu Desiv Achav Karim Tartani. That's what it means in pasuk. When the pasuk said before that we quoted in Tehillim that Hashem was creating Achav V'Kedem, front and back. Right, because it was two partsufim. It was a front side, which is a female or male, and the back side, which is a female or male side, and that was separated out. Elamad Amar Zanav, but according to Madamar, was a tail. My Achav V'Kedem Tzartani. When what does it mean? Hashem created the front and the back. Here it doesn't make sense, right? Because the front and the back doesn't really make sense. It was the regular male who had a little bit of an appendage, and that was used, that appendage, to make the female. So what does it mean, Achar V'Kedem? The front and the back you created. There was no front and back. It was just one being. So the market is Rabbi Ami. And this goes to Rabbi Ami. Rabbi Ami, Achar L'Maisa Bereshis, V'Karon L'Peronius. What does it mean, Achar V'Kedem? He's supposed to darshan it that he was the last of Maisa Bereshis, and he was the first in getting Peronius. Says the Gemara, Bishlam Achar L'Maisa Bereshis, D'loi Ibriad Mal Shabbata. I understand what you mean when you say it was the last of Maisa Bereshis, because he wasn't created until the end of Friday. Peronius, the Maib. What do you mean it was first for Peronius? For what kind of Peronius? So before we go to the Gemara further, just to mention, there is the Gemara in Sanhedrin Lam Ches. The Gemara over there tells us that Hashem created the human late right? Hashem created the human being after the end of Ma'aseh Bereshis, right? Hashem created all the other things first. Why did He create him the last on Friday? So to tell him, if you're going to be arrogant, I feel yitush, right? Even a fly, and nothing was created before you, and to remind the person that he should be humble. That he shouldn't be thinking of himself too haughtily that he was created after everything. And also, as a warning to the minim, that nobody should say, well, I shouldn't say it's a warning. It prevents the minim from making the argument that the humans had a part in the creation. If they were created early, people say, oh, they're a shutta for Ma'aseh Bereshis. They're not a shutta for Ma'aseh Bereshis. They're nothing to do with Ma'aseh Bereshis. And that's what they created at the end, after Ma'aseh Bereshis is already done. Fine. So now we're going back to Agamar. So Agamar says, according to the way either Rav or Shmuel say, that what does it mean by even Hashem Elokim Asad Selah? That refers to the Zanav, that refers to some appendage, either some sort of tail or the rib. But Hashem had to take that and build out the female. So what does it mean then in Pasuk when it says Achavakiram Tzartani? What's the front and the back? So the Gemara says that the drasha is it's Kadon L'Maisa Bereshis and it was Achar. I'm sorry, it was Achar L'Maisa Bereshis. It was the last thing L'Maisa Bereshis, and it was Kadon L'Pranis. It was the first one that came to Paranias. The Gemara says Paranias Tamai. Where is it that you see by Paranias that the man was first? Elim and Paranias, the Nachash. If you're going to say after the sin of Adam and Eve that they ate from the Eitz Hadas, if you want to say it over there. But over there, you don't see that the man gets punished first; he gets punished last. When it comes to giving honor, you start from the top person, and when it comes to giving bad, you start from the bottom person. What's the situation where you see that by Gedula you start from the Gadol? That's the plus that we had. Right in last week's parasha that says with that, right? So the pasuk there refers to Aaron, then Elazar, and then Isamar, because you go after Aaron first, because he's the gadol, and that makes sense as the first part of what Rabbi said, the big dual maslim and agad. But what does it mean by klal maslim and akatan? With klal maslim and akatan, where's the situation we see by a klal? You start from the lowest sort of entity, the least respectable. So B'tchila Niskala Nachash. In the beginning, first the Nachash was cursed. Ubasayif Niskala Chava, and then Chava was cursed. Ubasayif Niskala Adam. So you see, you saved the human for last because he's the most honorable. The male was the most respectable, so therefore he got cursed last. So what do you mean? Achar v'kan Tsaratani. You want to say he was Achar L'Ma'aseh Bereshis, but where is he caught on the Piranias? He's not first for Piranias. He's last for Piranias. So the Gemara El Pranius the Mabul. Well, he wasn't first, but a Pranius by the sin of the Eitz Hadas. Man was first when it came to the sins by the Mabul. The Siv, because it says in Pasuk, "Vayimachas kol hayikum asher pnei Adam me'Adam v'had behema Bereisha Adam v'hadar behema." First it said Adam, and then it said behema. And again, maybe it also has to do with the fact of responsibility. In the situation of the Garden of Eden, it was the snake that caused the initial, then the woman, then the man. And the same as well, the kihishlas kol basar as dark ala oretz. It's true that it says that in a pretty general way, and maybe refers to even the animals. As the Midrashim tell us, they also were doing very inappropriate things. But fundamentally, it started from the human beings. It was human beings that were chamas, it was human beings that were hishkas, and the animals learned from them. Says the Gemara. And we are now up to the line over here where it says Bishlama. Yeah, Bishlama. Says the Gemara. The Bishlama Madam are parts of. It makes sense according to the Madam. We don't know. Again, Rav or Shmuel says that they were actual two beings, male and female, that were separated. I know this Vayitzer B'Shnei Yudin. That's what it means in Pasuk when it says Vayitzer with two different Yuds. What do you mean? Because Hashem created two things. He created male and he created female. Right? This will be another approach to what we had before. We have Vayitzer, it could be Shnei Yitzarim, right? We said Vayitzer could be, what does it mean? The two Yuds, the two Yitzers, right? The Yitzer Tev and the Yitzer Hara. And we said, but what about by animals? We didn't like that one. So we ended up going to the Reb Shimon Pazi. What Reb Shimon Pazi said? No, it was, I'm sorry, Reb Shimon Elazar said, do part sufin. Right, it was two faces, a male and a female. So again, Bishlam Madam are parts of Hanan de Vayitza, Bishna Yud, like we saw before. Vayitza with two Yuds is for male and for female. Makes sense. Two creations. And Lamanda Amar Zanov, my Vayitza. But according to Madam Amar holds Zanov, that it was a tail, it was an appendage, a rib. So why do you have two Vayitzers? What's the two Yuds? What are the two creations? Right? Because at that time, Vayitza Hashem Lakim Asa Adam, there was no creation of the woman. The woman is now only being created afterwards. The woman wasn't created before. So says the Gemara, Rav Shimon Pazi. Again, we just had Rav Shimon Pazi. What Rav Shimon Pazi say? Rav Shimon Pazi, Oilai li mi yitzri, Oilai mi yitzri. The two yuds are one is saying, "Woe for me from the Ben Shalom," right? If I listen to Meitzahar, and woe to me from Meitzahar if I listen to the Ben Shalom. So it's the same answer that we had before. Fine. It says the Gemara, Bishlam are parts of Hainu the Siv Zach on the cave of Bar. Right? It makes sense according to Mandar holds that they were male and female. That's what it means in Pasuk when it says Zacha unikeva baram. He made them male and female. He created them. Right? That's the first creation story. Still there in Parak Aleph before you get to Parak Beis. So it's mashma they created them together. Alamanda Amar Zon of my Zacha unikeva baram. But what according to you're going to say? According to the Mandar Amar holds that it was a Zon of that the only creation of the female is later. So then, what's the reason? That it said Zocho and he gave a barim at the beginning. He didn't create male and female. Says the Marcus Rabbo asked this as a question. It says Zocho and he gave a barim. It says in positive Zocho and gave a barim, which the Mashma created both male and female. And also, let's keep it telling Mashma only that he created one, only male. So how Kate said, how is it possible to make these two psukim work together? In the beginning, it went up, and as it were, it caused God Baruch Hu's mind to create both male and female. And then in the end, he only created one. So that practically speaking, Zachon gave a baram means that it was his intention to create both male and female. But for practical types of purposes, he staggered it and first created man and then created the woman at a later point. Fine. So Zachon Gemara, Bishlon the Amar parts of makes sense according to the Manda Amar holds parts of. In other words. According to the Manda Amro is saying that it was both male and female. That's what it means in Pasuk when we say that Hashem closed up the flesh underneath because the body was split, right? It was like this sort of dual action figure, right? It had both the male and female sides. So when you split it, then you have to be vayisker basar. You have to close up the cuts that were made. Elman Amar Zanav, my vayisker basar tachtana. But according to Manda Amro, there was a tail and appendage, a rib. So what is it? Vayisker basar tachtana. What flesh are you closing? What's this passion? The area of the incision, the area of the surgery that took the tail or the rib or whatever appendage that we're talking about. That's what it means. It closed it up over there in that specific area. Fine. So it continues. Oh, it makes sense according to Mandamar holds now it's a tail. So we're switching sides now. According to Mandamar holds it's the appendage. It's a rib. It makes more sense according to them. Even that's what it means in Pasuk. That means Hashem built it. Even Hashem has that selah. Hashem built something, right? Because right now there's no woman, and Hashem has to build it. And parts of my vayiven. But according to Mandamar holds the parts of, then what's the vayiven? In other words, what are you building? Is there already a female there? What are you actually building out? Says the Gemara, Shimon ben Menashe. Shimon ben Menashe. Why this even Hashem has that tzela? What does it mean when Hashem built the tzela? That Hakadosh Baruch Hu plaited, braided, pleated the hair of Chava and brought it to Adam. Again, how does that work? I'm not 100% sure, but nevertheless, the Gemara says that Hakadosh Baruch Hu plaited Chava's hair, Vavila Adam, Harishon, brought it to Adam. Rishon Shekem B'Krach because this is what we find in the various overseas areas where the current kliyasa b'niyasa. They call plating building. Again, that makes sense for vayiven. We understand what the word vayiven means. But what does vayiven Hashem Elokim esat tzela got to do with plating the hair? What does the tzela have to do with that? Right? The tzela is obviously not a reference to that, unless you're going to say that in fact what we're saying is according to the Malach that it's a part of that the vayiven Hashem Elokim esat tzela. Hashem is not building out her because she's already built out. So what it means is that Hashem is building out the hair, whatever, beautifying what is already there. But again, what is the tzela? What does that word have to do with anything? So that I don't really have a good explanation. Okay, so Davar Akar. Another approach is vayiven. What does it mean vayiven? So this is again to explain according to Malam Rol's parts of what does it mean vayiven. Hashem built Chava like a storehouse. Just like a storehouse is is narrower on top and wider on the bottom. The Kabbalah Paris in order to be able to hold the Paris. Avisha Katsar Milamala Baruch Mata. She's also in that sort of similar hourglass type of a shape. What's the reason? In order Kedei Kabbalah Savla, in order to be able to bear children. Fine. We will. Let's just do one more Gemara. Here's the most of the Yiviel Adam. Hashem brought Chava to Adam Rishon. I'm Rabbi ben Elazar. Malam Shnas Hakadosh Baruch Hu Shishman Adam Rishon. Hashem was like the groomsman of Adam Rishon. Mekalin the Torah Derech Eretz. The Torah is teaching you a big lesson. Right? Hashem brought by Yiviel Adam. Hashem brought Chava to Adam. So the Torah is teaching you that a person should learn some Derech Eretz over here. That what Sheyachs Gadol Kadam Shishbayin Svayerle. Somebody who's much more chashiv shouldn't have a problem helping out somebody who has chassan needs or whatever that is not on that kind of a level. Shouldn't feel it's beneath him because Hashem literally worked on the shidduch of Adam Rishon either by again plating her hair or by bringing her to Adam Rishon. If you look in the midrashim, you'll see all the various things that the Midrash talks about giving her. He was kosher to give her 24 different jewelries, etc. So says the Gemara. We will, all right, we'll have to stop over here.